You're watching NRA TV with Bill Whittle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle, live from Los Angeles, and this is the Hot Mic Show. You know, every year, thousands of people are injured, some of them very seriously, by falling in a shower or slipping and falling in the bathtub. Hot Mic slipped and fell in the toilet, and I don't know how it happened, and I don't want to know. Hopefully, we'll have him back tomorrow. Today's topic is who or what is going to replace the fake news, the mainstream media, fake news media. You know, there's some times in life where this cavalcade of catastrophes that have been the progressive movement and so on, watching the left, every now and then there comes a moment that almost makes up for it all, almost. And here's one that I like very much. Right after her defeat, well, not right after her defeat, because as we know, right after her defeat, Hillary Clinton was too busy crying and emotionally hysterical and some reports say blind drunk as well. But 2 or 3 days later, when she pulled herself together and spoke to the American people, one of the reasons she blamed for her loss was this idea of fake news. She's the first person that really brought that term to expression. Here she is just a couple days after her election loss.
The epidemic of malicious fake news and false propaganda that flooded social media over the past year, it's now clear that so-called fake news can have real-world consequences.
Yes, it is. It's very clear, Madam Clinton. The reason I'm excited and relatively happy about that is Hillary Clinton basically put the spotlight on this issue. And rather than weeding out all of those conservative websites that are running around between the toes of the giant liberal dinosaurs, they found that this term fake news was going to boomerang around and hit them quite effectively in the behind. So what do we call it? What else do we call it but fake news, mainstream media news, the existing media news? We're going to come back to the alternatives in just a minute. Let's take a tiny little walk through history, shall we? Not too long ago, a year or two ago, there was a gigantic scandal with Rolling Stone, where Rolling Stone magazine basically accused a fraternity at, I think it was the University of Virginia, of essentially providing a rape culture. Not just an individual rape, but a rape culture. She said that she and that story, the problem is that the story, you know, didn't actually happen. It was just made up out of whole cloth. Now, the backlash against Rolling Stone for this story, because Rolling Stone went to bat for this. They took this thing all the way as far as they could go. They denied it the way CBS denied the whole thing with Dan Rather. Kept denying it, didn't happen, and then finally they admit that it did happen. After enormous backlash, Rolling Stone magazine admits that they did not have any basis for the story. And as you might have seen there by that headline, a recent settlement is awarding the fraternity $1.65 million for defamation. And frankly, I wish it had been more than that. They simply called a bunch of young men a bunch of rapists, and this stuck to them, and their pictures were everywhere, and it just didn't happen. Hey, speaking of things that just didn't happen, especially speaking of rape claims that just didn't happen, you may or may not know of a person named Lena Dunham. She's the darling of the millennial set and big fan of Hillary, and the left looks at her as kind of like this sort of, you know, prophet of the future. Lena Dunham, in a book she wrote called Not That Kind of Girl, talked about her time at Oberlin College and casually mentioned that she'd been sexually assaulted by a Republican whose name I forget, but it was an odd name like Bernard or something like that. And as it turns out, there was a Republican at the college at the time who had the same first name, only this guy had never met Lena Dunham, ever. He'd never, ever met her, and there was proof that he'd never met her. And Lena Dunham had to apologize and admit that she essentially made the story up. She just plain made it up. She made it up because she wants to make conservatives look bad. Same way Rolling Stone, same way everybody else that we're going to talk about. They have to discredit conservatives, and this is the point, folks. They have to, it's actually quite a badge of honor if you think about it. They have to discredit conservatives by inventing stories about what conservatives did when in fact we didn't do those things. And that tells me that if they can't come up with any actual evidence of wrongdoing, that tells me I'm on the right team, and so are you, by the way. So where do we go with this fake news? I mean, we saw it with CNN, right? The CNN published a retraction. A couple of their journalists were fired. This whole thing, again, was a Russia, the full court press to make Donald Trump into a Russian agent. Nope, didn't happen. Fired, retracted, all the rest. We remember our friend James O'Keefe going there and interviewing a couple of people, including, I forget the name of that Marxist communist who they have there. But they said, no, there's really nothing to the story. We know it. So where do we go for news? Well, as it turns out, there is an entire movement coming up very quickly. It's been here for a while, but it's really starting to explode now that the mainstream media news outlets are becoming utterly, utterly useless, and no one has any belief in their credibility whatsoever. There are a lot of them out there, Daily Wire and Instapundit and National Review Online, all the rest. One of them that has been getting my attention lately, though, is called The Rebel. It's actually therebelmedia.com, therebelmedia.com, and they are reporting stories that you just don't see anywhere. And they're reporting stories as if they were actual unbiased reporters. No, I'm not making this up, honestly. I know, hopefully you're sitting down when you hear the news. So what kind of stories do they cover over at the Rebel Media? Well, here's a story just to kind of warm us up that appeared just a day or two ago. This was covered by the Rebel Media, and the headline is Peak Insanity. That's a great lead. First grader sent to principal's office for misgendering student. Well, what does misgendering student mean? Well, here's quotes from the article. Apparently, there was a little girl, a little first grader, first grader, and she sees a classmate who calls him by the name that she knew him last year. Let's just say it was Bobby. First grader. Hi, Bobby. Well, it turns out that this first grader is a transgendered student now. And so this little girl gets into horrible trouble, and she's called down to the principal's office, where, according to the article, quote, after an hour-long investigation, interrogation is a better word, by the principal, it was determined that the girl hadn't intentionally bullied the transgender student by calling him by his given name. This is America in 2017. Let me just read that one more time. It was determined the girl had not intentionally bullied the transgendered student, the first grade student, by calling him by his given name, by the name that they'd known him for as long as they'd been in school. Regardless, the girl was traumatized and told her mother what had happened, and then the mother is outraged, and I'm outraged, and you're outraged, and it is peak insanity. These are the kind of stories you can get that are true, that are sourced, and they're coming to you via the internet from a place like The Rebel. Now, we talked earlier about Rolling Stone and Lena Dunham making false accusations of rape, and one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And false witness may not sound like much, but Lena Dunham ruined the life of this guy who she just casually invented, and Rolling Stone ruined the lives of the 4 or 5 people that were named in that article, ruined them, destroyed their lives. And here with the details from another story is our friend Laura Loomer, who's a reporter for the Rebel Media. And Laura brings us a story of real shocking kind of a deterioration in American politics and presumption of innocence and all the rest. Laura, it's good to have you with us. Can you tell us about the general outlines of the story as it was presented to the American public by the mainstream media? And then we'll come back and get into the weeds about what actually happened.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So you have a man in California, a Trump supporter, a lawful gun owner, and his name is Mark Feigin. And he has some disagreements with Islam. And, he made a couple posts on the Facebook page of an Islamic Center's page in which he criticized them. Well, during that same time frame, somebody was calling the Islamic Center and leaving threatening phone calls and voicemails. And a month goes by, and then all of a sudden, Mark gets arrested, and he's charged. His home is raided. They take away his weapons, and he's charged with making threatening phone calls, and he's labeled as having committed a hate crime against Muslims by Kamala Harris and the Los Angeles Police Department. Then the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, gets involved, and they totally defame this guy. They say he was, quote, trying to plan a Columbine-style attack on the Islamic Center of Southern California. During the press conference, they showed all of his guns and weapons, and they tried to make him look like a crazy Trump supporter who was an Islamophobe and a racist who wanted to kill Muslims. Well, it turns out that's not exactly what happened. I conducted an investigation.
Okay, let's hold it right there. Let's hold it right there for a second. Let's hold it right there for a second, because I want to get into the details of what exactly happened, because what exactly happened is very interesting. But let's just hold on for a second and make sure that this picture frame is very clear for everybody. We have a guy who's known to be a Donald Trump supporter. An anonymous phone call comes into a Islamic center. A death threat is issued. It's determined somehow that this came from this Mark Feigin, and the entire state of California, led by Kamala Harris, who is the darling of the left-wing media, and she's definitely being groomed for the Madam President slot vacated by Hillary Clinton, who is the most corrupt individual who ever lived in American politics, but that's beside the point. So this guy is a Trump supporter, and he is set up not just as a guy who made a hateful comment on a phone recording. He is taken basically in front of the public, and his weapons, his legally owned guns, are used as evidence that he was about to commit mass murder of Muslims somewhere in America. And thank God for Kamala Harris, and thank God for the Los Angeles Police Department. But that's not exactly true, is it, Laura?
No, not at all. And, it sounds like the perfect narrative to, victimize Muslims and make Hillary Clinton look great. During the presidential campaign,
and gun owners.
When they wanted to make all Trump supporters look like hateful Islamophobes, right? But it turns out that
guns are ready to murder people.
Right. Yeah. So
I'm sorry.
There are phone records, right? And you would expect the Los Angeles Police Department or law enforcement or the prosecutor's office to look at phone records to determine whether or not somebody actually made a phone call before they charged them with a crime for making a threatening phone call to an Islamic center. It doesn't appear that ever took place. So a month after this happened, he arrested. Yeah, it appears as if nobody looked at the phone records. So I did this investigation, and I'm looking at the phone records. And if you look at the phone records from Mark, he doesn't have any phone calls that were made to the Islamic Center. However, another individual by the name of Michael Slauson actually did call the Islamic Center. And Slauson happens to just be the son of democratically appointed Los Angeles Superior Court Judge John Slauson. He was appointed under Jerry Brown, while Kamala Harris was Attorney General. So he was interrogated by police, and you can hear the interrogation in the story, and they say, hey, it looks like you made this phone call. Why did you make this phone call? And he admits to making phone calls to this Islamic Center, but he wasn't the one that was portrayed as the criminal in the public eye. In fact, the public, the mainstream media, never mentioned Mr. Slauson once. So
let me make sure I get this correct, because I'm sorry to have to keep stopping you, but this story is so incredible and so disturbing that I occasionally I'm just going to want to stop and put a stake in the ground, a little marker to make sure we know where we are in this upside down world of ours. You're telling me that this accusation was leveled against this Mr. Feigin without having checked phone records?
Correct. And he was arrested and had his home raided prior to them looking at the phone records. Because if they would have looked at the phone records, they would have seen that he did not make a call to the Islamic Center.
I want to get to this police raid because, why don't you just describe for us what actually happened during his arrest for a man who was charged without having checked phone records for making a threatening call to an Islamic center. How did the police respond to that?
So the way Mark described it is that he left his house around 7 o'clock in the morning and was just driving down the road. And then all of a sudden he looks out his back mirror and he sees a bunch of cop cars are trailing him as he's driving. They immediately order him to get out of his car and lay on the ground and put his hands behind his back. So he's like publicly humiliated in his own neighborhood. And he said about 20 cop cars swarm him with their guns drawn. And he was like laying on the floor. He had no idea what was going on. And they arrested him. They kept him in the cop car for several hours, and then they went to his house. He was living with his mother, and they raided the entire house and made him feel like a criminal, made his mother feel like a criminal, and they just made an entire spectacle out of it. I mean, they snuck up on behind him, something like you would expect in a terror raid, as if they were going after a terrorist, right? And here he is, just guns.
So when LAPD normally serves an arrest warrant, is it normal for them to bring 20 cars and come out of the cars with guns drawn as if the guy was holding a gun or shooting back? Is that normal procedure for a suspect who's just driving down the road, is not carrying any weapons on him? Is it normal that the LAPD sends 20, 25 people, guns drawn, to get this guy out of the car? Doesn't seem normal to me.
No. Say that's definitely not normal, but it sounds normal when you're living in an election where you have a very corrupt Democrat as Attorney General who seems to be willing to do anything to target conservatives and do anything to champion her narrative.
Yeah, that's right. And unfortunately for their narrative, there's hardly a week goes by without some kind of Islamic terror attack somewhere in the world. So I'm just going to speculate, Laura, because I'm just a guy with a good imagination. I'm wondering if these gigantic California liberals didn't think that they needed something on the opposite side of the pen. I'm just going to speculate and say that what they were doing here was looking for a conservative, a Trump supporter, and a gun owner, and portray him as if he had committed the same kind of atrocities that we see from Islamic terrorists. They just got to him in time. And so the balance scales equal, you see. It's, yes, there's some problems with Islamic terrorism, but look at this conservative terrorism that we stopped in the nick of time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you see what happened in San Bernardino, right? It doesn't exactly look good for all those California politicians that told us to welcome Muslims and told us that the only people who commit crimes with, semi-automatic weapons are white conservative males, right? I agree. But, I think what's more troubling, too, is the fact that despite the fact that this information is now known, he's still being charged, right? And there hasn't been any effort made on behalf of Kamala Harris or the LAPD or, the Superior Court System of Los Angeles to clear his name of these charges and set the record straight and say, hey, actually, he wasn't the one who made this threatening phone call. It was this guy. And also address this, wild conflict of interest that we see taking place. I mean, the guy who's representing Michael Slauson, whose phone is actually traced to the call to the Islamic Center. His lawyer is a guy named Trutanich, who's the brother, Dominic Trutanich, who's the brother of Carmen Trutanich. And I'm sure you know who Carmen Trutanich is. He was the former city attorney for Los Angeles.
You can only imagine my shock. Laura, stick around for a couple minutes, will you? We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about this idea of citizen journalism, because you're looking at a person who has decided to do the job that the press forfeited, that they turned their coats on, they committed active treason against the sacred idea of the free press going after the truth. They're just a bunch of typists, and they're operatives from the Democratic Party with bylines, and they essentially become the audiovisual department of the Democratic Party. This is the Hot Mic Show on NRA TV, and we'll be right back.
It's hard to believe, but this year marks the 6th season of The Noir Show. I've had a hell of a good time trying to put together the best take on gun culture I possibly can. And one of the best parts has been interacting with you, the fans. One thing you've said from the very beginning is we want more noir. Well, me too. So this year I'm doing things a little different. We aren't gonna wait until the fall to give you finished, polished, shiny new episodes. Nope. This year, we're gonna release content while we're still in production. So some of these videos are gonna make it into the final episodes this fall. Others are only gonna be standalone. Either way, my goal is to give you exactly what you want. More noir. So look forward to all sorts of new content from The Noir Show for the rest of the year. And I hope you enjoy.
I mean, if you were to Google him, you know, all of these things come up. It's Rich Froning. He's a Reebok athlete. He's the 4-time fittest man on earth. He's the 2-time Affiliate Cup champion. But if you're from Cookeville, you just know Rich is a good guy.
I can't speak more highly of Rich Froning, just simply because of his heart, of his humanity for people who are hurting.
That kind of love and support that you see in his heart and life, it just rubs off on you as just being around him.
4 years ago, we had our first Rich Froning's Mayhem for Mustard Seed, and this year we had our 4th event that raised over $200,000 towards the kids at Mustard Seed Ranch.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Hot Mic Show. I'm Bill Whittle, live from Los Angeles. And with us today is my friend Laura Loomer, who's a reporter for The Rebel Media. You can find them at therebelmedia.com. Laura's been talking about a story of a Trump supporter who was accused of making a death threat to an Islamic center, was arrested with 20 police officers and drawn guns, and then paraded all of his legally owned weapons out there as a sign that he was about to commit mass murder, because those nutty conservatives, they're just that far away from snapping. But it turns out he didn't make the call. Turns out the call was made by the son of a Democratic politician. Laura, we were talking earlier about the raid on how he was arrested, and I couldn't help but be reminded of Nagula, Basli Nagula. Remember him? He's the guy who made the movie that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama claimed was the reason that the Benghazi situation exploded. They blamed it on a movie made 6 months earlier. This is an American citizen who basically made a movie and figured, I have a First Amendment right to say whatever I want to. Only no, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama blamed him for the Benghazi catastrophe, and he was arrested at midnight with 28 or some number like that state troopers to make sure that this dangerous filmmaker not escape in a hail of gunfire. What the hell is going on here, Laura?
I mean, I think that the establishment and really, the Democrats altogether, they really just want to completely strip conservatives of their First Amendment right. They can't get rid of us entirely, right? I mean, if they could, they would. So they're doing everything they can to just take away our ability to speak out. We see it on college campuses with these riots. You see it with the way Antifa reacts at protests. You see it with, the arrest of filmmakers and journalists. I mean, look at how many journalists were charged, under Obama's presidency for espionage, I believe, more than any other presidency combined. So, it's clear
and Dinesh D'Souza too.
Yeah, and of course what they did to Dinesh. It's clear that there's an assault on our First Amendment, and you can't take away the First Amendment, but you can break a person down. You can humiliate a person, and you can beat them up so badly to the point where they're almost fearful of speaking out, because of these consequences, which are now becoming violent. We see that people are acting out in very violent ways, and they're trying to coerce conservatives and Trump supporters into being silent.
Yeah. Let me ask you one final question, Laura, getting short on time. You were able to determine all of these facts that we mentioned during the show, that this man was falsely accused, that he didn't make the calls, that there were no traces of the call records because the call records were never traced. However, son of a Democratic politician did have a call to the Islamic Center, and so on and so on and so on. Here's my point. You have done the work that the Los Angeles Police Department, the state of California, the Los Angeles Times, and everybody else should have done. There are entire buildings, huge buildings containing thousands and thousands and thousands of employees who are supposed to be doing the job that you're doing, and you're out there doing it by yourself because you have some respect for this idea left called the truth. How did you get yourself into a situation like this? I don't even know. It's not even a question, Laura. Really what it is, I'm just trying to tell you how much I admire you. I can't believe that one person could do all of this as simply as possible. So my question in closing briefly is, how does it feel for you to be a real reporter, an actual reporter, not a guy who's in the news suppression business, somebody dedicated to finding out what the truth is and exposing it so that the American people can make their own decisions? How does it feel to be one of the last reporters left on the American continent?
No, I mean, it feels great when you can report something that, you know, that when you can disprove a narrative that the left-wing mainstream media has been pushing, right? These lies that they've been pushing in order to destroy lives. But at the end of the day, it feels great knowing that I have the capability to do journalism like this. But it's not like the mainstream media and these, you know, powerful multi-million-dollar news corporations are picking up the story, right? I mean, alternative media is on a rise, and it's up to us to report real news that the fake news refuses to cover. But we're still outnumbered in terms of resources, right? So it would be
to
great,
say the least.
it would be great if the real news would say, hey, look, we made a mistake, or this is wrong. Our reporting was wrong. Let's actually correct the record. But I've reached out to, you know, the outlets that defame this individual and reported this fake news story and asked them to correct the record. And they've said no, they aren't replying. So, you know, there's only so much citizen journalists like myself can do, right? It's at the end of the day, we still don't have the power to, you know, impact the editorial nature of the mainstream media.
It's coming, though. It's coming. It's getting stronger every day. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Laura Loomer from therebelmedia.com. You can see her writing over there. And I don't know if they have a donation page or anything, but if you want to actually get some actual news out with actual reporters, that's where I would drop a dime, me personally. Laura, thanks so much for being with us today. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, one person in an apartment, essentially, in New York or Washington, I forget where Laura is able to do some fundamental footwork. I mean, just the basics. What do the phone records say? What about all these other things? Did this actually happen, yes or no? And it turns out that forget the whole thing about the narrative, forget about blowing open the narrative, forget about using this as a counterbalance to the Muslim terrorism thing. Put all of that aside. One individual American citizen's life has been ruined and destroyed by this machine, by this left-wing smear machine, abetted by the California, state of California, the Los Angeles Times, and all these other newspapers that couldn't do the fundamental basic footwork that one individual in an apartment in New York could do probably in the space of an hour. So it's disgusting and it's disgraceful. And we're going to be looking at more of these stories as the days and weeks go by. I'm Bill Whittle. This is the Hot Mic Show. We'll see you tomorrow right here on NRA TV.